Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. Give us just a minute here. We're going to have more people file in. Let's see how many we get up to this morning. Man, I've been hearing crazy stuff going on with Meta ads last week. We have a lot to cover in next week's newsletter. We're going to see what's going on. I don't know. Lots of people are reporting breaks, underreporting, spend, all sorts of things. We'll see what comes across. Fernando, thanks for joining us today, man. I'll give you a proper introduction here in a second when more people are here, but thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, we're already 2 after. It looks like we got about 50 people here, so I'm going to go ahead and go for it. Let me share my screen here. All right, everybody, welcome to the Media Buyer Newsletter webinar, where we are going to deep dive into the latest e-com data powered by Northbeam to see what trends, anomalies, or interesting findings we can uncover. I'm going to keep it simple this week, show you some data, and then we're going to drive straight into a chat with Fernando Menendez we have here, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his agency, some work that we're doing, what's working on, what creative platforms, and we're going to keep it casual, just chat a little bit today about what's working, what's new. But first, let's go ahead and get into the data. So this week, finally seeing a little bit of normalization on Meta. We'll get into that a little bit more, but not too many changes across the board in terms of budget. I always see Meta kind of in between 65 to 67%. This varies depending on what industry you're in, what percent of your budget actually falls on Meta. But the fact is, it's still, for most people, their highest converting channel as far as performance ads goes. So no surprises here. Glad to see YouTube rising up the ranks. I do think it's a little bit underappreciated. It's a more challenging channel, but it definitely works. I don't think enough media buyers are on there, and we're long on YouTube here on this channel. Have been for a long time. First, let's dive into auction and conversion metrics. As you can see, finally, some normalization on our Meta metrics. I know we're still seeing conversion rate going down, ROAS is down, CTR is down, but really, if I'm seeing things within 2 to 5% changes on Meta, that's pretty good for me. It takes up the vast majority of people's budgets. If you're not seeing vast, double-digit swings or anything really over 5% here, that's pretty good. That's what we want to expect. That's what you could say is, oh, it's weekly normalized changes, as normal sort of fluctuations you'd see week over week. And Google follows very closely in that same vein as the Meta performance, because they're deeply connected, and they're both the vast majority of most of our viewers' budgets. So I'm happy with the performance I see on here. Lots of normal variance you see this week. Google, everything's kind of like the 3.5% change or less. TikTok, of course, is still varying pretty wildly. It has a lot of dramatic fluctuations, but there's a lot of upheaval going on there. People don't know if, oh, do we need to yank our spend from that account? At the same time that TikTok's working really hard to onboard lots of SMBs and get people spending. Click-through rate dropped off pretty dramatically, but CPMs are finally down. They've been rising for many weeks in a row. So happy to see that finally come down. Looking at Google Shopping, finally seeing Google Shopping, bounce back up here. PMax still commands 40% of the budget share. I would have loved to have seen this. Maybe I'll pull some historical data at some point before PMax existed. It's really interesting to see it grab so much of the budget. It's so relatively new, right? But it still holds about 40. Shopping still hasn't broken 10% of the budget yet. We'll see how much that changes. I know Google's trying to push more of its shopping. A lot of the AI stuff they're talking about is very shopping and commerce related. So I wouldn't be surprised if this continues to change. But this, once again, is just kind of a reflection of our media buyers' choices. It's not necessarily always a reflection of the performance when you see this budget share change, right? In this budget delta. Looking at the industries, it was a tough week for everybody. Honestly, what's happening is we're having now finally a seasonal shift. So, there's always this drop where everybody's ads from the previous season kind of struggle to keep up, or purchasing behaviors totally change. You see things like jewelry going through the roof, buy a mom that necklace for Mother's Day sort of thing going on last week. Whereas things like baby are finally dropping off, electronics are dropping off, but a lot of these verticals have been having success for a long time, into the double digits. So I would say, barring this being some sort of structural incident where, something happened in an auction or whatever it might be, that, we've heard people reporting, I would say that most of this is within normal variation. It's really interesting to see baby finally stop its meteoric rise. That's been happening for several weeks now. Health and wellness drop-offs are probably expected. We're getting out of the top of the year resolutioner season, and sports equipment's probably going to make a big comeback here. New customers are up a little bit, but sports equipment's probably going to go up as we start to get into the summer, and people are buying things for their various, the seasons all start kind of at the end of the summer, right, with the school year. This is going to be a really interesting chart to look at once we get finally to the school year. But generally, our opinion this week, our bottom line is that it was a tough week for most people. Most of the meta changes that you see, most of the budget shifts that you see are within normal variations. And I think a lot of these red arrows here on YouTube are pretty deceiving. I think YouTube, especially with certain exclusions set and with the right type of ads, and not even focusing on shorts, right, but thinking other parts of YouTube and the major changes they've been making to their algorithms, I think it's pretty deceiving. So this week, blissfully, a normal standard week for media buying. That's our bottom line here. Now, I want to get to our coolest and favorite part of the show. Fernando, thanks for being here today, man. Fernando is the founder of F-Scales, a performance marketing agency. It's done about 25 million in revenue for its customers, people like Red Bull and Hulu. And we brought Fernando on the show today just to talk about creative strategy, what's working, what's going on in Northbeam. I might bring up some ads. I might bring up the Northbeam platform and look at, but yeah, just happy to have you here, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first things first, tell me a little bit about yourself, your agency, some of the clients that you've been working with, so our team knows, or our viewers know who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Fernando and my agency is F-Scales. And I started about a year ago. I used to be a former paid social director at Meet6, which is where I really got to work with a lot of direct to consumer brands. And it was during the time when it was, I guess you can call it the golden era, when everyone was just easily seeing performance go up. And luckily, because Meet6 was so creative focused, I was very involved in the creative process. So I've been creative first since 4 years ago, basically, whereas a lot of people are kind of just jumping on it now. So a lot of what comes down to what my agency does is really being focused on the messaging and the creative side of things, because once you get that honed in, a lot of other things fall in place. Obviously, there's still the landing page and CRO portion that's also very important, which I can talk about later. But that's just a high level of what makes us different.
So as far as creative strategy goes,
yeah,
when you're talking to a brand and you're starting to have this conversation, what in your mind, from a creative standpoint, is the most important thing, and how do you start that process start discussing that and uncovering that important thing with your customers?
Yeah, it really depends on where they're coming from, because some brands actually have spend, right? So that we actually have some historical performance to go off of. And so platforms like Northbeam are especially valuable post iOS 14 because the Facebook platform metrics are just so wonky, right? So with Northbeam, we're able to look at I like two attribution windows more than anything. It's clicks only and first view. Clicks only, mostly because then if, for example, I had one brand a long time ago where they had a really strong influencer program, so Facebook would take a lot of credit for influencer. And so a platform like Northbeam kind of give you a clear picture of what's working actually by Facebook, what's being actually driven by Facebook. So that's where Northbeam is especially valuable. And then in terms of oops, I don't know what just happened to my screen.
Sorry, I stopped sharing so that I can bring up some Northbeam.
Oh, okay, that's what happened. No worries. But yeah, so they have historical performance, and we could use a platform like Northbeam to kind of look at what's actually working versus what isn't. If they don't have that much, I use another tool called Foreplay to kind of see what their competitors are doing. And because I've been creative testing for such a long time, I kind of have a gist of what is working, what isn't, just by looking at their ads library. And the trick is, if you see one video and there's several different variations of it that's been up for a while, then that usually means there's something working and they're just continuing to tweak it to make it better. So that's like the main portion of it, of how like I dive in.
Cool. I mean, that makes sense to us. And like, I don't know. It's funny because like a lot of people, I think historically were looking for, oh, what's the perfect way of structuring your campaign, or what's the perfect audience to target, right? And at the bottom line is it always comes down to creative. Like it really always does. It's messaging and creative. What are some creatives? I know you work a lot in UGC. Doesn't have to be that, but what are some creative kind of types or formats or templates that people talk about that are working right now that you see that you really like?
Yeah, so UGC is obviously the most common. I feel like the one that's the most talked about. But a new one that I've actually seen working recently with one of my brands is sort of like kind of like this podcast style sort of like ad. So if you guys spend a lot of time on TikTok, you know how like there's those podcasters where they start talking about a particular subject. So we essentially did like kind of like a fake podcast that's somehow related to that vertical and somehow, is like basically saying, oh, we reviewed all these products and this one is like the best one for that vertical, right? So actually that's a new concept that I'm seeing work particularly for one brand. And so now my game plan is to try to test it on other brands to see if it's just like a one-off or something that could be applied to different ones. But I'm very bullish on it just because on TikTok, that is sort of a style, right? It's the podcast style. You get like the clip. And so I think that's something huge that's going to blow up.
That's the style where they're like in a studio and maybe there's a mic, right? Or they like have their headphones on, and because it's vertical, it's 9:16, the camera like snaps between the people talking and there's typically like subtitles. That one, right?
Yeah, so there's that one. I've even seen it even without like the different people talking, just straight to camera, like someone on a mic, talk like kind of like a review, right? Kind of thing.
Oh,
That's been working. So it's pretty cool because then you can take different personas. So for example, there's this home goods company that's usually been mostly sold to women, but we kind of diversified a little bit by having like this like guy with a big beard kind of have a podcast called Big Boy Toys. And then he starts reviewing these bed sheets. And it's actually been working. So what I like about the podcast style is the versatility of taking on like welcome to the episode of Big Boy Toys or some kind of other different persona that can easily allow you to kind of tap into different audiences too.
is there something to be said about the algorithm and like visual artifacts or structures or things actually in the shot that are affecting that? Like, is it, when it comes to those picking up style and being a thing that people like to watch, is it because there's like a microphone? Is it because it's straight into camera? Like what is it about these templates that make them work? Like I always assumed it was like, oh, if you have a microphone in the video, if somebody's engaging with videos that look like that have podcast stuff in them, right? You're emulating that visually, and that's what's making it move in. Is that what's going on there? Like why does that appeal?
I think it's because it comes down to like it kind of looks very native to the platform, right? That's kind of like why UGC worked for so long, is because it felt like, oh, okay, this isn't like necessarily an ad. This is just like kind of like an interesting, engaging video. And so I think UGC is, I think a lot of people are experiencing some road bumps on UGC. I don't know if you heard people talk about it, but I think it's because it kind of got played out a little bit. Obviously, there's still ways to like succeed with UGC. But like this podcast style, I think because it hasn't been like completely exploited by advertisers, there's still a lot of opportunity there. And I think it just comes down to it feels native to the platform, especially TikTok and Reels, because you always get those clips where like a famous podcaster is like in the middle of saying like the most interesting soundbite, and then it goes into like the rest in like, I don't know, 15, like 30 seconds max.
And I bet they're still like fun to watch. Like I bet your ads are still funny, they're still engaging. And which I'll return to, but question on that, are you using real podcasters? Are you finding influencers with microphones? Like I could see trying to, hire a podcaster who has pretty high fees could be hard to get them to convince them to like, hey, can you do this for a price that's not like egregious? But like, how exactly do you source talent for that sort of thing?
Yeah, we're actually using actors because
Nice.
obviously now you don't have to pay these high fees. And so basically a lot of like the creativity comes from the script writing because you're basically script writing a fake podcast show that's like how do you say it? Both entertaining and educational, right? Because these podcasts are usually also entertaining and very engaging, but they're also very educational. So it kind of makes it a lot easier with that format. And we're basically script writing this. So it could be like whatever show you really want that somehow taps into like that kind of vertical that you're trying to sell in. And then obviously you can do puns in there. You can do a variety of things, but at the end of the day, it has to be both like entertaining and educational.
And that's the key, because I think a lot of people go, oh, well, all you're doing, I mean, a cynic would say, well, all you're doing is you're fooling people, right? Because you're making something that looks like one thing and it's another. But actually, you are making stuff that's entertaining to watch. People will sit and watch ads, even if they know it's an ad, if it's entertaining. I
Mhm.
mean, hell, Geico figured that out 15 years ago, right? Like, um, and the problem with, I think, the roadblocks you mentioned in a lot of UGC is people forgot that like UGC should be engaging and interesting. And
Yeah.
it's and all of it's like we're using all the same scripts, we're using all the same AI generated lines, we're using all the same hooks, all the same, because everyone's like copying each other, right? And
Yeah.
there's something to be said about like, hey, I'm gonna make something, an ad that's engaging to watch, that looks native, that feels native. So people are more likely to stop and scroll on it. But also, like if they watch it, they want to watch it. They're not going to see it because media literacy is really, really high. Like trying to chase that new, what's the most, what's the currently unexploited by marketers type of content we can make, right? People always try and chase that. And the awareness, the education from users, the understanding of what it is at an ad and what is not is going to keep up with that. So it's
Yeah.
like, if you could make an ad that is so clearly an ad, but it's still engaging to watch, people will stop. And I think that's what they kind of forget. They're like, oh no, we need the perfect thumb stopper hook. We need this, we need that. Um, and really what it comes down to is entertaining and educational.
Yes, actually, I'm glad you bring up the numbers because I think sometimes we do get really caught up in the numbers of like, oh, it has to be above a 40% thumb stopper and then above like a certain percentage click-through rate. That we forget the bigger picture of it having to be both like engaging and informational.
Yeah, for sure. When you're that creates problems though, because like we're sticking to those numbers because it's the way that we understand
Mhm.
what's performing and what's not. So, you know, when you're working with clients and you're trying to break them out of, I'm sure you've worked with clients who have a tough run with UGC and you come back in and you're like, no, you need to do it, but you need to do it this way.
Yeah.
What sort of metrics are you looking at when you're trying to say to them, these ads are working, these ads are not? Like, what are you working? What are you looking at? What kind of cadence are you looking at it? Yeah, talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so the first metric we look at, right, is CAC, because that's kind of like whether or not it worked. But then all the other metrics above it kind of tell you why it didn't work or why it did work. So that's when I really start looking at kind of like the creative holistically. And so if you look at it from like the top, there's thumb stop rate, right? So thumb stop rate is important because if you can't get them to stop scrolling through the feed, then even if the rest of the ad is amazing, it doesn't matter. So that's like the first thing we look at. And then we like to look at something called hold rate, which is basically through plays over 3-second video views, which kind of tells you like did they stay on like a little longer, like 15 seconds. Video average watch time to tell you like how good the video was at keeping people. Click-through rate, which is also really important because that means like did they go to the landing page or not. And then another one, which I really like that I use a lot from Northbeam, is actually ECR. ECR has been huge for me because I have ran into situations where we can get like thumb stop down really well. We can get like click through rate down really well, even video average watch time down really well. But if ECR isn't there, then you can still end up with like a really high CAC. So kind of looking at what the bottlenecks are within like those other metrics that lead into CAC is like how we're able to identify like what the blockers are.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, you have your performance numbers and you have your conversion numbers, and it's like maybe something performed really high, but it didn't convert, and maybe vice versa. And that kind of tells you like what you need to change and shift in the ads. I want to go back to I want to go back to the actors thing again, because a lot of people ask me, they go, finding influencers is impossible. It's a pain, right? And I think there's kind of two schools of thought. There's, you go out and you get an influencer, and if you do this, you get their native network, their audience with them. And
Yeah.
then there's going out and finding actors who are going to make paid ads for you or organic content for you. And their following doesn't matter because you're going to put money behind it, right? And some people try and kind of do, they don't understand the difference between the two, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings, and I think sometimes people get caught up on doing one or the other. I think they're both like really effective. I think it's just when you go down the actor route, it does require someone who can direct and like strategize really well. Because if you're just getting actors and you're not giving them like a good brief or good lines, then they're kind of like being misdirected, and it's going to be hard for them to make something that converts.
I would say even like, and I've used actors off like Backstage, literally. Like it's amazing. You can find people who can just, you give them $100 and they'll just make the best ad you've ever seen, and they're just some random person in their, in their room with a phone. But it's all about like, do you have the ideas for it, right? I think another interesting one is, do you ever work with having customers help make that UGC? And like, is there a business where that would work, where you could perhaps work with your customers and be like, make me something, follow this script and I'll send you some more, or follow this script but then riff a little bit in this section? Like, have you ever worked with that? Does that sort of thing work?
Yeah, we did like a couple years ago and we saw some successes with it, but honestly, we haven't like revisited it in a while. And it's something we really want to do because naturally, right, the customer actually likes the product. I think from there, the harder part is whether or not they're comfortable in front of the camera. Because there are customers who like may be passionate about the product, but maybe they get nervous when they get on camera or they just don't know how to speak in front of a camera. So that's like the harder part. But it's definitely something we want to revisit because I do see a lot of potential going down that avenue as well.
I hear stories of CS teams working really closely with your customer service to get on and talk to people on your social channels. And I hear amazing stories of like, oh, we found this random person who's a
Yeah.
huge fan of our product, comments on all of our Instagram posts. We hit them up, we had them make an ad, and now 30% of our online revenue runs through this person's ad. And they're like an existing customer and they just make stuff for us. And they're like, we could never tell her how much money we make off of her, or she would demand like a huge paycheck, right? Um, but I think at the end of the day, she's happy being the face of a brand that she loves. And like, that's, when you're talking about making UGC, I think so often people want to look towards apps like, I can't remember, I'm trying to remember some of their names off the top of my head, but there's apps where you can like hire influencers to make short form ads for you. Have you ever worked with any of those, or do you prefer to hire people on Backstage and like control the scripting and all of that stuff manually yourself?
Yeah, we lean towards more like actors and actresses. Just because for us, that's kind of like our bread and butter and something we specialize in. So we go on like casting networks, we go on like Backstage, sometimes even TikTok Creator Marketplace. But because we've been doing this for a while, we kind of have like some people who are good at certain things that we can just hit up and be like, hey, like we have like this beauty product. We know you love beauty. We know you've done well for other beauty brands. Like, here's like the brief. Are you interested?
It's crazy the similarities between what you're doing and what a normal TV casting director would do. Like literally, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like people make their whole careers appearing in TV commercials, and it's like they're always appearing in another Swiffer commercial or another floor cleaner commercial, right? Right? Like you name it. That's pretty funny. Um, I would love to talk more about creative. What's something you see everybody doing that is just wrong, that they shouldn't be doing? Like I know you see ads all day long. What's some stuff that you don't like that you see people doing?
In terms of like me, like
Creative strategy, media, the placements they're running. Like what's some stuff that you see that's common that people don't like? Or what's something that's common that people do that you don't necessarily think is the best practice?
trying to think. I think some UGC ads are just clearly like, I don't know, like just scrapped together. Like there's no strategy. They just have this person talking. It's kind of like what I talked about when people use actors and like there's like no brief or no direction. And so obviously you can get lucky sometimes if you get an actor actress who's well versed in UGC and they kind of like put in all the legwork for you. But obviously we're not trying to leave things up to chance. And so if you don't do a good brief, then you could easily end up with a UGC video where it's just like not strong because they're just not hitting on your valid props right. They're not talking about it the right way, or maybe they clearly look like, maybe they have a gun to their head kind of thing, like where they're clearly like fake. So I still see a lot of those UGC videos out there, surprisingly. And I think it's just because of the lack of like strategy that goes into the pre-production process.
And that's the toughest part, right? Like that's the part that people I think get tied up on, and where you can help them out. It's like you've seen this 100 times now. You've run 100 of these campaigns, and you kind of know what works. And it really is an alignment between what we know works and what's kind of new and fresh and feels native.
Yep.
We're coming up on time here. I would love to, because this is a Northbeam show after all. Tell me a little bit why you like Northbeam as an agency owner, especially, and somebody who runs, tons of creative optimizations on several accounts at once. Tell me, what do you like about Northbeam?
Yeah, I love how it easily lays out all the numbers. And for me, because I'm big into creative testing, that again, that ECR to me is very important. And being able to see that in either first view or clicks only is especially important, so I can optimize my creative effectively, because we're more of a data-driven creative agency. So we actually need to have like, as obviously not, we don't expect perfect attribution, that's not, we can never have that. But having like the most accurate data helps us iterate briefs better, helps us iterate hooks better, helps us iterate like things past the hook better. And it just allowed us to like make our creative like more effective.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do here, so I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I'll make sure our product team hears that.
Yeah.
Fernando.
I forgot to mention one thing. Percentage of new visits too is very important. Because that's something like for brands that are really need new customers, percentage of new visits, one of the best columns ever.
It's great, man. I mean, the balance between like the first visit bit is like my favorite stuff. I love doing one day ROAS. I love being like really, really conservative with it, and then being able to go back and look later at like my clicks and views and see like, oh, halo effects of these ads I've been running, even if they haven't converted in the moment. Fernando, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Are you looking for new clients? Are you available? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, our bandwidth is a little limited, but if we chat and is a good fit, then we can make it work. And so the best way to get in touch with me is through my email, which is fernando@fscales.com. I could probably put it in the chat here as well, just so people have it. Type it in. There it is.
Great, man. What kind of clients do you like working with? I know some people specialize in certain things. Are there certain industries you like, things like that?
Yeah, so we're pretty general, but the ones that we do get a lot of is health and wellness and beauty, and home goods. And it's cool because obviously beauty and health and wellness, we've realized there's a lot of similarities actually. And because of those, we have so much experience with those. We have talent that can kind of go like both ways too.
It's great, man. Thanks for joining today. I don't think, let's see, I don't have too many questions. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. People can reach out to you there. Of course, we'll have this recording up on YouTube immediately after that. And if anybody has any questions, tweet at us at Northbeam. Get a hold of Fernando. We're all here and love talking about this stuff every week. So yeah, thanks for joining, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right, everybody. We'll see you here same time next week.
Take care, everyone.